asked, what's the single most important piece of information to include in your book blurb? And then like the most important piece of information for fiction and the most important piece of information for nonfiction. This is a really good question. And your question made me laugh, Lisa, because book blurbs don't necessarily have a single piece of information that must be included. Book blurbs are really a recipe and a concoction that needs to have a few key elements in them, because the sole purpose of your book blurb is so that anyone who has picked up your book, has flipped it over and is reading the back of your book, or anyone who is on Amazon browsing and then they click on your description and they go to the book blurb, the goal of your book blurb is for them to want to buy your book, for them to want to read your book. So it's not just one thing that you put into it, but I'm going to walk you through a few key elements to think about and have in your book blurb, because your book blurb is basically a sales pitch for your book. And yesterday in Momentum, Kim Rempel was making a really good point to the people in Momentum that so often as writers, we are writing our stories, we're writing different things, and we're in our creativity, we're having fun with it. But then when it comes to writing about our book, all the creativity goes out the window, and it's very easy to just fall into kind of fact telling, information giving, and we forget to use all of our storytelling skills in writing our book blurbs. So as you approach writing your book blurb for both fiction and nonfiction, you need a compelling first line. You want the first thing the person reads to really capture their attention and draw them into the story. And your compelling first line, it can be surprising, it can be sparking their curiosity, wondering what's happening. It can be a little bit clickbaity because we want them to keep reading and to get engrossed in this idea of the book. And then for the structure, some things to keep in mind is having that hook, which could be your compelling first line, or you may have other hooks throughout. The second thing you need to include is your character if you're writing fiction. So they need to know, who is this about? Maybe showcasing a little bit of their personality or their emotion. And if you are writing nonfiction, your character would be your audience. So if you're writing a nonfiction book blurb, you want it to be really clear who this book is for. So your blurb will be kind of to your reader, showing them what's included, why they need this book, how it will change their life, what to expect, what pain points it'll help them overcome. The third part of your structure that you need is the conflict. So for fiction, this is the obstacles the character faces, the tension in the story, the conflict is what makes people keep turning the page. It's what allows chapters to end on cliffhangers. It's what gets readers invested to want to know what happens in the story, what happens to this character. And a really good example of conflict, not in a book blurb, but I picked up a book the other day called Sea Change, and it starts off, in this peaceful pasture, and there's this dad and his little daughter, and his wife's like on a tree stump reading, and then all of a sudden there's this like wild stallion that is obviously diseased and maybe rabies, but it is like charging them, and there's nowhere to hide. And so there's like 3 pages of this incredible like nail-biting encounter between this man and this horse trying to protect his family, and the chapter literally ends with not knowing if the daughter is okay, because he's like facing the horse for the 3rd time, and he sees out of the corner of his eye his daughter darting away from the tree that he had her and his wife hiding behind. And so you literally end that chapter with just this feeling of, I have to keep reading, like what happens? And so I share that story with you as an example of the type of conflict that you want even in your blurb, so that the reader doesn't know what's going to happen and they're just enticed to want to read this story and figure it out. And if you are writing nonfiction, the conflict is going to be centered on the audience, the readers of your nonfiction book. So if you're doing a nonfiction book about weight loss, then you would talk about, why you want to lose weight, the health benefits, all of those things, so that the conflict, and you probably talk about how hard it is. Maybe you've tried different things. In the same way, for example, with my book, When God Calls a Writer, the conflict is you're filled with doubts. You're wondering if you're called by God. And so it's the blurb includes that because the reader that the book is perfect for is going to relate to that conflict and want to know how to resolve that conflict in their own life. So let me just recapture what I said. So you need a compelling first line. And then when you're thinking about the structure, you want a hook or multiple hooks. You want the character, audience, their personality, whether it's a fictional character or a nonfiction reader that you're writing to. And then the conflict is so important. Like, why does this matter? What's the tension? What needs to be overcome? And then the last two things to include in your blurb when you're writing it, one of them is your expertise as an author. So most blurbs will talk about the author in third person, and you want to highlight your experience and your expertise. And this is both if you're a self-published author or if you're traditionally published. You'll see this in book blurbs where they say, like, national bestseller so-and-so has this book. So you always want to show off your expertise and experience so people trust you as a writer that your book is actually going to be good. And then the last thing to keep in mind is making sure that your book blurb is in the same voice and style as the rest of your book. So if I go to the bookstore and I read a book blurb about time travel and it sounds fascinating and exciting, and I go home and then I open it and it's actually written in this like really dry, boring way, that would be such a disappointment. So we want our book blurb to be aligned with the rest of our book, so it really is, people get what they are buying when they read that book blurb. A few things to avoid. You want to avoid cliche overused lines. With your book blurb, you are going to have to write it multiple times. So have fun with it, brainstorm different first lines, edit it, do it again, ask for feedback, have other people brainstorm with you. It's really hard to get your book blurb just right the first time. And you can also go to bookstores, Amazon, look at other people's book blurbs. What words are they using? How are they structuring it? We never want to steal anyone's ideas, but we can definitely be inspired by them and make them our own for what we're working on. So I hope that encourages you to tackle your book blurbs and make them amazing, because that is what will sell your books or help sell your books. It's not the only thing.